Hey everyone, welcome back to Molten Hues. If you're new here, I'm learning the art of stained glass, and in every video, I create a piece inspired by an incredible true story from history. And as I build today's stained glass wave, we're diving into one of the strangest disasters ever recorded. A disaster so unbelievable that if you haven't seen the historical photos, you probably think it never happened. And if you enjoy fascinating histories, creative projects, and stories that sound too crazy to be true, make sure you like and subscribe, and let's get into today's story. Before we get started, I used a lot of different browns and amber colored glass to represent the molasses. I wouldn't have typically used this color for this project since it's like a wave and you would probably want to use blue, but I wanted to represent the story the best I could, and today we're using brown glass. Imagine you're walking through the streets of Boston on an ordinary January afternoon. You're on your way home. Kids are playing outside, horses are pulling wagons through the narrow streets. Nothing seems unusual. And then all of a sudden you hear what witnesses later describe as something that sounded like a machine gun. A deep metallic roar echoes across the neighborhood. People stop and they look around. And then they see it. Not water, not smoke, not fire. A 25-foot wall of molasses racing towards them at nearly 35 miles an hour. It sounds ridiculous, almost like a joke, but on January 15th in 1919, it really happened. Today, while I create this stained glass wave inspired by the event, we're diving into one of history's most bizarre and surprisingly tragic disasters, the Great Molasses Flood. To understand how something this strange could happen, we need to go back to Boston in 1919. At the time, the north end of Boston was packed with immigrants, factories, warehouses, and narrow streets full of life. Molasses wasn't just something people poured over pancakes. It was a valuable industrial product. It was used to make alcohol and food productions. It was an important ingredient in manufacturing, and demand was high. So one company decided to build an enormous storage tank. It stood roughly 50 feet tall, about 90 feet across, and it can hold more than 2 million gallons of molasses. Imagine standing next to a building 4 or 5 stories high, filled completely with thick, sticky syrup. The tank overlooked a busy neighborhood where hundreds of families lived and worked every day, and almost from the beginning, people noticed something wasn't right. The tank leaked constantly. Residents complained and workers complained. Molasses dripped from the seams so often that neighborhood children would bring cups to collect it. Think about that for a second. Kids treated the leaking tank like a free candy dispenser. The company knew it leaked, but instead of fixing the problem, they reportedly painted the tank brown. They didn't repair it, it just made the leaks a lot harder to see. Whether the decision alone caused a disaster is still debated, but it became one of the most infamous details of the story. Looking back, it's almost impossible not to wonder, how did no one stop this? January 15th started unusually warm. Temperatures had risen drastically after a cold spell. The tank had recently been filled with fresh molasses. That combination may have increased the pressure inside, and just after noon, the steel gave way. Witnesses described hearing a thunderous explosion. Rivets shot through the air like bullets. The massive tank burst open, and more than 2 million gallons of molasses surged into the streets. The wave reached an estimated 25 feet high. It moved around 35 miles per hour. At first, the molasses behaved more like a liquid than people would expected. It slammed into buildings, crushed wagons, knocked homes from their foundations. People had almost no time to react. Some tried to run, others were swept away instantly. And telephone poles were snapped. A freight train was knocked from its tracks. Entire buildings collapsed under the force. When I picked this project, I wanted to make something that could be used for multiple different things. It's kind of hard to think about something to make that would be relatable in other settings. So I didn't want to make a big wave in a small town of Boston because that would be crazy. Who's ever going to want that or see that ever again? So I picked something that is kind of versatile and kind of more abstracty. That's why I picked this style of a wave because it kind of related to this story. Now, I didn't consider the fact that there's going to be a lot of curve cuts, and I told you in my last video that I'm really bad at curve cuts. So I prayed to the heavens that this cut properly, and I did a bunch of scores in it, and I tapped it a ton of times. And thankfully, when I did it, it cut perfectly, and I was so thrilled. And I did a few other ones not being recorded, and it worked out okay, just fine. I did break a couple, but everything worked out in the end. Then something unexpected happened. The molasses began cooling. As temperatures dropped, it became thicker and stickier, and people who survived the initial wave found themselves trapped. Rescuers couldn't simply run in. Every step became a struggle, and some people were stuck waist deep. Others couldn't move at all. Firefighters, police officers, and local volunteers. Even sailors from nearby naval ships rushed to help. They used ropes, ladders, axes, and anything they could find. Rescuers later described trying to walk through molasses like trying to move through a wet cement. It clung to everything: boots, clothing, equipment, even horses became trapped. The smell of molasses filled the neighborhood for days, and some residents claimed that they could still smell it during warm weather years later. When everything was over, 21 people had lost their lives. Around 150 others were injured. For a disaster involving molasses, it's easy to assume the story's funny, but for the families who lived there, it was heartbreaking. Cleanup crews worked for weeks. They washed the streets, scrubbed buildings. Even the harbor turned brown as molasses mixed with seawater. People joked that Boston became the stickiest city in America, but behind those jokes was a community trying to recover. One question remained: how could this happen? The investigation lasted years. Experts examined the tank, and they looked at the steel, the rivets, and the construction. Eventually, investigators concluded that the tank had been poorly designed and not properly tested. It simply wasn't built to safely handle the enormous pressure inside. The company was ultimately held responsible and paid damages to the victims and their families. The case became one of America's earliest examples of large-scale corporate accountability. It also helped change engineering standards and building inspections across the country. In a strange way, the Great Molasses Flood helped make future construction much, much safer. I think that is one of the reasons why this story has survived for so many years. It's a century at this point. At first, you hear the words molasses flood and you almost laugh. It sounds impossible, like something from a cartoon. But the more you learn and the more you realize that this wasn't just an odd historical fact, it was a preventable tragedy. One that had changed the way engineers thought about public safety. History has a funny way of doing that, though. Sometimes the stories that sound the strangest end up teaching the biggest lessons. And working on Stained Glass Wave gave me a new appreciation for that. At first glance, it's just a wave. But knowing the story behind it, it changes how I look at it. That's one of the favorite things about making these projects. Every piece reminds me that there's a real story behind the design. Something inspiring, something unbelievable. And sometimes it's both. If you made it this far, thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. I hope you enjoyed learning about one of the history's strangest disasters while watching this stained glass piece come together. I'd love to know what you think. Have you ever heard of the Great Molasses Flood before today? Or is this one of those stories that made you stop and say, there's no absolutely way this is real? Google it. It's real. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. And let me know if you have any future ideas. Put them in any suggestions that you may have in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, I really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, Molten Hues. It helps the channel more than you realize, and it lets me keep creating stained glass inspired by history's most fascinating true stories. Next time, we'll be tackling another unbelievable event from history and turning it into another piece of stained glass. Until then, keep creating, keep learning, and remember, sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.